The biggest thing that I've noticed, I mean, like starting this journey and like becoming an entrepreneur and stuff, this was not at all in my comfort zone. Like I was always kind of somebody who I like startups and like I'm a quick learner. I'm very adaptable, but I had never tried to go out and do something like that by myself, like have my own business. And it's funny because you don't have these self-doubts as long as you're in your comfort zone. You know, you feel very capable, you feel very confident, very good about yourself, you know, like you could tackle everything. Like if you just happen to be in a very nervous state and you only have a couple minutes and like you just kind of want to calm down quickly, but you only have 5 minutes, okay? So it's not as in depth, but what you can do is you can either tap on the karate chop point just with the side of your fingers, or you can do the collarbone. Sometimes, like, I mean, if you're on a bus, you might not want to do and when you dig into why somebody is procrastinating, a lot of times people don't know, but there's a fear or resistance many times behind it. And once you can figure out what that is, many times it comes up as, I'm afraid to be seen. I don't want the spotlight. I'm going to be, criticized if I do this. What if I fail?
Welcome to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Dahya. I'm so grateful that you're here listening or watching this podcast episode. Would love for you to share this episode with your friends, your family, and your workmates. And if you haven't already done so, please follow or subscribe this podcast so that you don't miss any future episodes and we can get this podcast out to the wider community. Today, our guest is Andrea Hunt, an EFT Empowerment Coach who helps people overcome their fears, anxieties, and self-doubt to step outside their comfort zones and become the best versions of themselves. I love this already. All through transformational coaching and EFT tapping, Andrea guides clients to release emotional blocks, reduce stress, and improve their emotional health. As a US expat, Andrea has lived in 6 countries: China, Germany, Argentina, Mexico, and UK, and Italy, giving her a unique global perspective on personal growth and resilience. She's also a published author and are passionate about her sharing her insights through podcasts and interviews. Andrea, welcome to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just super happy to be here.
It's great to have you here. So, Andrea, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your journey in life. What have you, what's happened in your life? Give us a little bit of context of who you are.
Try to give you a very short summary. So I'm originally from Minnesota, in the U.S., and I'm from a town called Rochester, Minnesota, and it's not much happened there. It was not a very big town, and so I just knew that I wanted to kind of go out and explore. I've always been kind of curious, and my teenage years were kind of difficult for me, and I just knew that I had to go and like kind of find myself and go explore the world. So I decided to move to Mexico when I was 20 years old by myself, and it was like my big thing to like do alone, and like nobody believed that I would actually do it. Like I told my parents that I was gonna go to Mexico and to England and to China, and everyone's like, yes, Andrea, that's great, it's great. Yeah, but nobody actually thought I would do it until I actually bought my plane ticket. So I organized all this stuff. I had 2 jobs waiting tables where I was able to save up all this money, and I left. And it was one of the scariest things that I've ever done, only second to moving to China by myself, like 8 years later. But it was one of those things where I knew like I was so terrified. Like I didn't know anybody in Mexico. This was before cell phones. This was back in 1998. And I didn't speak Spanish. Like my grandmother was Spanish, or sorry, Mexican, but she didn't teach me any Spanish. So I was just determined to kind of go there and figure it out. And I remember like I finally reached my guest house, and like the father of the guest house like let me in the middle of the night, because we got there from Mexico City. And I sat there on the bed and I just cried. I was just like, oh my God, like, what have I done? Like, I can't believe that who does this, And I was thinking to myself, am I brave? Am I stupid? Am I crazy? I had no idea. But this would kind of become kind of like a pattern that like, I knew that I need to make changes. And sometimes it would be something that was absolutely terrifying. And then it would be the best thing possible. But I had to get out of my comfort zone in order to figure that out. So, fast forward, like I went to school at the University of Georgia. It's an hour outside of Atlanta. And during that time, I was really fortunate to be able to do some study abroad programs. Argentina and Italy, 2 countries I absolutely love. And I ended up finishing my university degree, and I was in South America. And I met a girl at a hostel in Bolivia as we were having pancakes at the hostel. And she had been teaching English in Korea. And I was like, that is so cool. Like, how do you even get into that? Like, I didn't know anybody who had, ever gone to Asia or something. And she was like, yeah, actually, if you have a 4 years, degree and have English as your first language, you could do it too. And I was like, really? I'm like, but I've always wanted to go to China because that was my original plan, but I didn't do it.
Mm,
It was just
mm,
an idea at the time. So I ended up moving to China. Like once I got back, it was also partly due to a breakup. I was just like, I need to go start over. Like I need to
mm,
do something else with my life. So I decided to go over there, teach English for a while, just a little bit under a year. And everything was happening in Beijing. I was not in Beijing. I was in a small city in Zhejiang province by Shanghai. And so I moved to Beijing, started studying there. And yeah, I stayed there 7 years and ended up back in Germany. No, not sorry, not back in Germany, but here where I've been for 12 years now.
nice, nice. Sounds like an amazing journey that you've been through and exciting as well.
And so I didn't know how much to include. It's kind of a long story, but
All good, all good. So, Andrea, EFT tapping is a unique tool for emotional health. Can you explain what initially drew you to this practice and how it transformed your own life?
sure. Well, I didn't hear about it. I hadn't heard of it until I was doing my master's program here in Germany. And I was kind of an older student. By the time I think I was 34, everybody knew how to study, and I had completely forgotten during the time that I was working in China and, having jobs and everything like that. I had forgotten how to memorize information anymore because that's not what you do at normal jobs. And so I remember it was finals week and I completely freaked out. Like I was a total mess. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Nothing was working. Everyone's like, "Oh, you should meditate and exercise." And like nothing was helping me. And I remember I was just like Googling. I was just like panic, stress, keywords. And this video came up by Brad Yates and it said EFT tapping for fear and panic right now. And I was like, that's the one.
Mm,
And I kind of turned it on and he was just, tapping. And I was like, this looks ridiculous. Like this is one of the like what is this, But at the time I was just a total mess and I was like, okay, fine. Like I'm gonna do it. Like and so I was tapping along with the video and after the video I was like, well, that's funny. I'm like, I feel a bit better. Like I'm not perfect yet, but I definitely feel better. Okay. So I have to keep doing it. And so I did it. I think it took me probably 3 or 4 times because I was really quite a mess. And by the end, I was sitting there calmly, just kind of like, what just happened? And so that was my intro to it. And then he has thousands of other videos. And I was just determined to try it on everything. I mean, it was like, disappointment or anger or, whatever. And it really changed my life because like I I don't think that I had really learned well how to manage stress and emotions, especially in that kind of like environment where school where you have so much extra pressure that I just wasn't used to anymore in terms of I didn't know how to deal with that anymore. And it brought up all of these feelings of like fear and inadequacy and all these things which just made it worse. And so that became my tool that, before a presentation or something like that, I would do tapping to try to calm myself down and feel grounded before going into these kind of situations. And
mm,
then yeah, so that's how I found it. And then I started using it, and it wasn't until once I got my coaching certification, I decided, okay, this has to be part of what I'm doing as a coach because I
mm,
found it so beneficial for me.
mm.
And also, what was interesting is that I didn't really understand just by doing YouTube videos, like how many things that you can really use it for, which I'll
Mm.
tell you about a little bit later in terms of emotional blocks. But that's really where the transformation kind of for me was able to come about.
Yeah. And was there any specific moments of the experience that made you realize the power of EFT tapping?
Absolutely. I mean, I have used it for everything. I've used it for, I mean, during the pandemic, I got laid off from my job, and that was a terrifying time to be laid off. Just like, what am I supposed to do with myself? Like, because nobody was hiring during the pandemic, and also I'm in a country far away from my family. And I didn't know when I was going to be back to the US. I mean, like I've used it for breakups. I've used it for, fears that I have around like putting myself into the spotlight as a coach, doing Facebook Lives or something like that. That was never something that was within
Mm.
my comfort zone at all. Even simple things like Excel spreadsheets. Like I had a very irrational fear of Excel spreadsheets. And I would just be like, ugh, and it would take me way too long. And I had one tapping session in a workshop, and I can do them now. So it's
Yeah,
weird for small things too. I mean, it's useful.
yeah. And what about like things like self-doubt and anxiety, or stepping out of your comfort zone? How has it helped with that?
Absolutely. So I think the biggest thing that I've noticed, I mean, like starting this journey and like becoming an entrepreneur and stuff, this was not at all in my comfort zone. Like I was always kind of somebody who I like startups and like I'm a quick learner. I'm very adaptable, but I had never tried to go out and do something like that by myself, like have my own business. And it's funny because you don't have these self-doubts as long as you're in your comfort zone. You feel very capable, you feel very confident, very good about yourself, like you could tackle everything. And the second you make a plan to kind of rock that boat and put yourself out, then there's the self-doubt that comes in like, what if my friends and family think it's stupid? Like, what if I, do a Facebook Live and I don't know, somebody from high school sees it? And so these are normal things that come up with a lot of people, especially when they start their own business, that they don't even realize that, they've done all this work on themselves or they're really super capable, but then you just push them out of that zone and then it's terrifying. And so
Mm.
I've used it for myself every step of the way. I mean, I never, even a few years ago, like I wouldn't even have been on podcasts. And now it's like something that I feel very comfortable with. But that was also part of the transformation, just feeling comfortable doing that.
Mm. Well, if it makes it any easier, I never thought I'd be doing podcasts, and here we are.
Exactly. You don't know.
Yeah. So for those who are new to EFT tapping and its benefits, could you talk us through how it works and why it's so effective in reducing stress or emotional overwhelm?
Absolutely.
Mm.
So you have acupuncture points all over your body. Like you've probably seen, there's a figure of a body and you can see, the nervous system and how it's connected and all these different points. And it was David Callahan and Gary Craig, who they were both interested in acupuncture and they were also interested in different kinds of alternative treatments. And so they figured out that you don't actually need to do acupuncture in order to get like a release of stress in the body. So they figured out that if you tap on these points, that it will calm the nervous system and get you out of the fight, flight, or freeze response. So it's the sympathetic nerve system that is activated into fight, flight, or freeze, and then the parasympathetic nervous part of the system that is calming it. And so what happens is it's releasing oxytocin, it's lowering your cortisol, which is stress hormone. And what was the last one? I was read this. Yeah, cortisol and endorphins and oxytocin. Yeah. And so while all that is happening, it's able to kind of release the fears and the negative emotions. But the important thing is it's not masking them, it's helping you to process them.
Mm.
So, which might be, I don't know if it's necessarily different than other modalities, but it's helping you work through these difficult feelings so that they're not like stored up for later. You know what I mean?
Mm.
You're able to,
You
and
release
this
them.
is especially like
Mm.
helpful for emotional healing and things like that. When you need to work through the anger, why you're angry, and like to get rid of it, not just calm it down.
Mm. 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 Yeah. And what role does tapping on these specific acupuncture play in calming your mind and body? Like, what does it actually do?
Well, I mean, it's sending a signal to your nervous system to get out of the fight, flight, or freeze mode so that it's not
Right.
in panic mode. And
Mm.
so you can literally use it on anything. So now like, whereas originally it was just kind of like used by a very small group of people, now they have it in clinical applications, also different coaches, also therapists. Even some therapists use it along with, is it EMDR? EMDR?
Mhm.
And so like what they've done is made all sorts of different studies to see like the practical applications. So everything from stress and anxiety to PTSD in veterans to traumas to phobias. I personally don't work with those issues, but it's definitely so powerful that you can work on those kind of issues as
Mm,
well.
mm. So can it be used for professionals who may be suffering or struggling with self-doubt and imposter syndrome?
Absolutely. And that's, I
Mm,
mean, I've that's one of the top things that people don't usually like to admit that they have, but like most people
mm,
do have it.
most people do, yeah.
And the thing is that I mean, there's different kinds of imposter syndrome, but a lot of times when we have memories that can trigger our self-doubt, that can be part of it. And so one of the stories that I feel like I think a lot of people can relate to is like, let's say there's a kid who 8 years old, he's in his classroom and, like holding up a picture in front of the class, and the teacher criticizes his, his drawing or whatever, starts criticizing him, saying things that feel bad in that moment. The whole class laughs. So then you have the added feelings of shame and humiliation. And so then, like, in that moment, the kid is realizing it's not safe to be seen. It's not safe to be heard. When I try to be proud of myself and like show something that I did, I'm going to get, struck down, and I'm going to learn not to do it again, and
Mm,
so, of course, some people are able to grow out of that, but there's a lot of people who have very real fears and, that add to the imposter syndrome because of some memory that they have when they were a kid. And so,
mm,
like, later they have like a boardroom meeting and, they're afraid to do their presentation suddenly out of nowhere, because they're still having those feelings in their body.
mm. Yeah, yeah.
And that's where, like, you can use EFT tapping, first of all, to reduce the emotional charge of that memory. And then you
Mm,
can, in the present, to release the fear and anxieties about, I don't know, for example, the presentation, doing the presentation,
mm.
preparing yourself beforehand, and then kind of using the empowerment statements so that you can rewire your brain, so to speak, to feel more confident.
Yeah, yeah. And so you've lived in different parts of the world and have a global perspective on resilience and personal growth. How have your experiences abroad influenced the approach of EFT and coaching?
I think learning to manage things on my own, needing to like have the tools to be able to manage things, because when you move to a different country by yourself, I mean, and I have a wonderful group of friends now, but like it's not instant. Like there's a lot of times where, you're completely alone, or something happens and you don't really have anybody to go to yet. Or in China, like I made a lot of friends and then they would move away. So, I mean, because it was a very, transient place, like in Beijing, especially during the Olympics. So you meet these amazing people, totally get along with them, really great people, and then they're gone. And so then you have
Mm,
to kind of start over making friends again. And so having to work through some of those situations by yourself, like you really do need to have the tools. Also to be resilient, because especially when you're living in a place far from, your family, and um I don't know, especially like in China, things can change from day to day. And then, the visa situation might change. And then you realize that the kind of visa for people from your country doesn't apply anymore. So like you have to go to Hong Kong the next day, and that kind of stuff happen all the time. So it's like constantly feeling like you're just on your toes and you have to just adapt, adapt, adapt.
mm,
And if you're not able to do that, you will you will not survive. You know, that's a true story, by the way. I literally realized that my visa, like, that I had for Americans, like, was not valid anymore, and I had to go back to Hong Kong, like, after going there last week. So, like, oh yeah.
mm, mm. So are there any particular cultural differences or challenges that have enriched your understanding of stress and resilience?
Hmm. I'd say in China, there was a constant feeling of not knowing what's really going on
Mm,
sometimes, because it's not like in Germany, I feel that they're quite open and direct with communication, especially in the workplace. I feel like everybody kind of understands what they're supposed to do. they're really good at like meetings and like wrapping it up and being like, okay, so does everyone understand like their role? Um, and it's really not like that in China. Everybody kind of was just like, yep, we understand. And then everybody goes away. Nobody knows their role or what they're supposed to do. So sometimes I found that quite confusing.
Mm,
And I actually have
that
to
would
say,
be.
like, in Germany, I kind of like it. Like as opposed to, I mean, I lived in the UK as well, and obviously I'm from the US, and the German transparency and directness can be very refreshing in terms of knowing
Well, at
what
least
you're supposed to
you know
do.
where you stand, right?
Yes, you do. And it's not confusing, and I
No,
appreciate that.
yeah. And I think, like people get stressed. It's generally because, you've got uncertainty in your life, right? You don't know what's going on. And so anxiety, fear and anxiety comes in when you're uncertain of what's in whatever environment you're in. Yeah. And how
Absolutely.
does living outside your comfort zone, as you have, relate to what you teach your clients about stepping out of theirs?
Um, I think it's because during the course of my life, I mean, as I said, like moving to China by myself, moving to Mexico, I think that intuitively, we usually know what we're supposed to do.
Mm,
We're just being kind of like guided and kind of just nudged in a certain way. And if not, I think sometimes when you don't listen to that intuition, something will happen where it's like, you know, where it will kind of push you in that direction where you don't have like a choice anymore. And so
mm,
I find that even though some of the changes in my life have been very scary to make, it was always the best thing for me that I knew at the time was right, you know? And it wasn't that it was easy, but I think that like, I think confidence is not like a light switch. I think it's like a muscle. And so,
mm,
you go to the gym one time expecting a six pack. Like you have to go in there and kind of increase the number of sit-ups or whatever that you do so that you're creating new evidence for yourself. And so
yeah.
you can keep looking back and be like, look, I handled that. I
Mm,
did this. And so I'm
mm,
just going to keep going a little bit more and a little bit more.
yeah.
And some steps are bigger than others, but you're creating more certainty with yourself that you can handle it,
Mm,
even when
yeah.
it's, scary. Because I don't know if you ever really get to a fearless place,
Well,
where like,
yeah.
no challenge scares you. I don't know.
Yeah, personally, I prefer to live in my uncomfortable zone permanently, um, because I find that's you're constantly growing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so it's also our life is about expansion. It's about expanding out. It's about growing. It's about ascending, um, and like I mean, I believe in the whole vibrational energy, and if
Hmm.
we're raising a, if we're expanding out, we're growing through that process, then we're raising our vibrational energy to be able to then be in a vibration that where we become a magnet to attract the things that we want in our lives. Um,
Absolutely.
and it's important to know what we want in our lives as well, because there's a lot of people that just aimlessly walking through life, not really knowing what they want. They know what they don't want, but they
Yeah.
don't really know what they want, right? And
Hmm.
I mean, in my years of dating experience, I always said, "Oh, this woman didn't know, or that woman didn't know what she wanted." Um,
Yeah.
but then when I look back at it, really, did I know what I wanted? Because it's a
Yeah.
reflection, right? It's a,
Absolutely.
so it's like, so sometimes you have to go through these uncomfortable situations I believe, to come to the realization and the awareness that, hey, there's some work that you need to do in your life to get to point where you actually know what you want and where you're going. Yeah. And so
Absolutely.
it's so important. Yeah. So EFT tapping helps reduce emotional blocks and stress. We've talked about that. Can you talk a bit about the common blocks that you see among professionals and clients that you work with, and
Mhm.
how tapping helps them release that?
Sure. I'd say some of the biggest things, procrastination. And when
Mm,
you dig into why somebody is procrastinating, a lot of
mm,
times people don't know, but there's a fear or resistance many times behind it. And once you
mm,
can figure out what that is, many times it comes up as I'm afraid to be seen. I don't want the
Mm.
spotlight. I'm going to be, criticized if I do this. What if I fail? Or they maybe have like, some kind of a goal that they had in the past. They call it like a goal trauma with a little t, where they really, really, really tried to do something and they failed. And so a
Mm.
certain part of them keeps them having these like wonderful dreams, and dreams aren't scary. People are like, oh yeah, yeah, I want to write a book someday and I want to do this. But the second that like you try to get somebody to take the first step, like, okay, so you need to write the intro. Okay, cool. Which date on the calendar? This is gonna be the day. And suddenly that's when, their body goes into fight, flight, freeze, and they're starting to be like, oh no, I couldn't do it. And then that's when, we start making excuses for ourselves and we find all the reasons why we can't do something. But then actually, like I said, usually it's fear of criticism and being judged or
Mm.
like spotlight. That is a really powerful one. And I mean, of course, we all want to be liked, but we shouldn't let the opinions of others kind of keep us from doing things. And that's one of the things
Mm.
with tapping that you can really, get into like kind of using a little bit of humor, like, okay, well, I'm just gonna hold myself back. I sure hope everybody appreciates it, because I'm just gonna, keep myself small and not rock any boats. And I'd say that. And I mean, I had some situations where clients worked on like a website, for example, for an entire year, and then it was totally done. But then they use perfectionism to be like, oh no, this one part is just not ready, and like that. And so you keep like raising the bar on yourself. And so perfectionism, things like fear of failure, and those are all things that you can tap away, really.
Yeah, yeah. And would you say that sometimes people like creating those thoughts for themselves, like our thoughts about, hey, I'm not good enough to be able to do this,
Mhm.
or do you feel that people are creating these stories in their own heads, but really the outer world is not even taking notice of any of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I had so one client of mine, like, so she was really afraid she had gotten out of shape, and then she felt that she was at a point where she was too big to go to the gym. And she was like, everyone's gonna look at me, they're gonna laugh at me, they're gonna make fun of me. Because this was her experience when she was in
Mm.
high school. And so even though like she doesn't even they're not the same people, it's a totally different gym, like she's super confident in every other area of her life. She was like, no, I can't do that, like they're gonna laugh at me. And so like after one tapping session, this is only like 1 hour long, we got through the feelings of like, okay, so wait, why am I letting these people, I don't even know who's there, why am I letting them decide whether or not I get to work out? like like that's crazy. Why am I letting them decide whether I'm healthy? Like that doesn't make any sense. And so we kind of tapped all that away, and the next day she was able to go to the gym, which is pretty cool.
Mm. Mm. And
Very empowering.
yeah, yeah. And like, what would you say to someone who really wants to do something, but they're too afraid to start doing it?
I would say first figure out what is your goal and what is your intention.
Mm.
Make it into like, what is the first step that I need to do? And look at what the emotions are that coming up. And so
Yeah.
there's always like a, okay, so why don't you do this? Yes, well, I can't do it because of this. Like, what is behind it? Is it a resistance? Like to, I shouldn't be doing this.
Mm.
Somebody won't let me do this. Or maybe it would look bad if I do this, something like that. Or is it a fear? Like I'm gonna be shunned by my colleagues. I don't know,
Mm.
whatever. Or in my country, my culture, people don't do this. Or in my family, nobody did it this way. Or I mean, there's so many things, but once you figure out what it is, and I do workshops on this, like to figure out what are your limiting beliefs, where did you get them? Because once you know, then you can start working on them. But a lot of
Mm.
times we might have self-doubt and just be like, okay, well, I'm not good enough. And that's a really common one. And that's unfortunately like a lot deeper because most of the time people have these experiences that kind of validate that feeling. And so it's
Mm.
kind of like you need to peel the onion, kind of
Mm.
tap on each of the experiences and
Mm.
to be able to kind of reframe it. So, okay, what are some of the examples you have that you are enough? Probably,
Mm.
enough to your family. You're probably enough to your friends,
Mm.
so that you can reframe and start kind of rewiring the brain to think more I don't know, more loving and more kind and more compassionate towards yourself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember in my working life, I was always told I talk too much, and that I ended up having this sort of complex about it. Like, yeah, I need to stop talking and I just
Yeah.
listen and don't talk at all. But then people go, well, you're not engaging, and I go, well, hang on, you just told me not to talk, and now and
Yeah.
so it can get a bit confusing when other people say something like that. But like when I realized that I wanted to do something like starting this podcast, right? And I just started. Like there were people in my coaching community that were talking about it, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to start it. These people
Yeah.
are talking about it. I'm just going to do it. And so I remember one lady had already done about the trailer and a couple of episodes, or two, 3 episodes, or half a dozen episodes, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I ended up going way past her in a matter of weeks.
That's
But it
amazing.
wasn't it wasn't because it was a competition or anything, but it was just like, well, if this person can do it, I can do it. And I
Absolutely.
just believed in myself. And I just started. The first thing I did was a 1.5 minute trailer, which I don't think it was that great, but it's okay. I just did it. It was imperfect. Wasn't perfect. It was okay. I just did it and posted it. I mean, and then last week I remember my this podcast was a year old, and I was with my daughter, and I got my phone, and I recorded this video, the first take, and posted it.
Well done.
Yep, first take, and I didn't care if there was because I'm showing my authentic self,
Hmm.
showing
Absolutely.
who I am, warts and all. If I make a mistake, who cares? Just showing,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm human, right? So yeah, what advice would you give someone who's in that sort of space?
The other thing I forgot to add on to the end of the story. So like my client went to the gym and she was like, nobody even looked at me.
Yeah.
Like she's like, literally, I was there, I was working out, it was great. Nobody looked at me, no one cared that I was there. Like
Ah,
it was like this thing that, she had built up in her head for so many years that like when she was actually there, she was like, God, I can't believe that like I didn't come. So I think like so many times we create resistance and fears for ourselves about things that are not as big of a deal as we think that they're going to be. And
mm,
the other thing too is like, I think most of the thing is just starting. Like you said, I mean, that's such a great story, first of all. Just like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna do this today. That's it. So I would say like my one of my slogans that I always try to remind people is that like, if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? Because there are people out there. There's another quote, by the way. This is kind of how I thought of this. And it was like there's people out there doing the things that you want to do just because you believed in themselves. They believe in themselves. I mean, and there's so many people out there that you probably know people at work where you're like, I could do that. Like, why why are they like, doing it like that? And maybe I could even do it better, but like why don't I? Like I mean, we need to take challenges and risks in our lives, and we don't grow unless we do that. Um, but most of those things, I mean, like they are manageable as long as you are able to identify like, okay, what is the thing that I need to work on in order to get from here to here? And once you can, and like I said, created the proof, you can just keep going.
mm, absolutely. Yeah. So why do you think the fears like criticism and self-doubt are so prevalent among high achievers?
I would say, unfortunately, a lot of it comes from like, family, teachers, kind of, at least in terms of what I know and like my clients, it's usually that, okay, so why are you so hard on yourself? Who was hard on you? Oh, okay, my dad. My dad always told me that if I didn't get an A, then it wasn't good enough. And so I think naturally then we internalize that dialogue as a
Mm,
as a child. We're not even thinking about it. We're just hearing, if I don't get an A, I'm not good enough. If I'm not perfect, I don't get any acceptance or I don't get any love. And so even though we're adults and everything like that, and we make a mistake at work or something like that, we're still thinking, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Like, why did I do that? But whose voice is that? Is it yours?
Mm.
Or did you get it from somebody
You got to
or
follow,
some
yeah.
situation?
Mm.
Or maybe you saw it happen to like your brother or something like that. A lot of times people see examples happen to other people and they're like, okay, I've learned to do, not to do that.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And are there some specific steps that people can take or tapping routines that you recommend to start breaking down these blocks?
I always think a good place to start is just YouTube, Brad Yates. He's still one of my favorite EFT tapping practitioners. Like he literally has thousands of videos on every single thing you could possibly want. And the ones that I do like almost every day are ask for no resistance. Like before you go into whatever a work setting or just pretty much anything. It's such a good one just to allow yourself to open up a space for things to go right. Because like
Mm.
instead of expecting, oh God, they're gonna say this or this is gonna happen, and just it kind of clears that away to set yourself up for positive things to happen.
Mm.
And there's another one called Amazing Day. I love this one because it's just like it's like 4 minutes long and you're like, I'm gonna have a wonderful day. I know that I got this, just really makes you feel good and empowered. But try out Brad Yates and see like if they resonate at all with you. I mean, I always think that like for surface level emotions, like stress and I don't know, annoyance, like those kind of little things, YouTube videos are really good. If you want to
Mm.
do more deeper work, that's something that usually is way more complex because like I said, we're kind of like onions. We have layers, especially when it comes to our limiting beliefs. So like it's important to work with a practitioner to kind of unravel those because you might have
Mm.
one that a kid, like not feeling good enough, and then like later you have a breakup where somebody, leaves you for somebody else, and so it just kind of reinforces of that, forces that. So it's kind of like untangling Christmas lights. You have like
Mm.
all of these little situations that validate that feeling of unworthiness, and
Yeah.
you have to tackle them individually sometimes, even though they're
Mm.
kind of connected.
Mm. So that was Brad Yates, is that correct?
Brad Yates, yes.
Brad Yates and An Amazing Day on YouTube.
Yeah, an amazing day. Yeah. And
Nice.
also like I have a free EFT like ebook that I
Yeah.
wrote that I also be happy to give you and you can show your audience so people could they just want to like learn a little bit more about it and things I
Yeah.
didn't cover.
So we can put the link into the for the ebook into the podcast description. Yeah. So now one of my favorite topics is confidence. Is
Hmm.
so confidence is something that you believe that can be built up like a muscle, right?
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
to me that confidence, is all linked to our self-esteem, our self-worth. When we work through our self-worth and then build our self-esteem, then that boosts confidence, right? So what advice would you have for someone who feels stuck and doesn't believe that they can show up confidently?
At first I would challenge it and be like, okay, so why? Like
Mm.
why wouldn't you not be enough? And
Mm.
figure out where that belief came from. Like I said, like, is it something that you saw? Is it something that you learned? Is it something somebody told you? Because then, I mean, once you can, for example, go through the tapping rounds, you work on all of the negative stuff. And so
Mm.
say and articulate these feelings out loud. Because a
Mhm.
lot of times the reason that we don't work on things and they don't improve is because we don't like admitting maybe that we don't feel good enough. And especially
Mm.
around other people. That's embarrassing,
Yeah.
to say something like that. So I mean, we would start with a session where it's like, even though I don't feel good enough, like I don't feel worthy. Usually it's tied to a situation and that is triggering that feeling of unworthiness. So you'd
Mm.
start there and have them just explain why. And then you can kind of go into challenging that because I sometimes use humor a little bit, like
Mhm.
um and it kind of it gets it reframed a bit so that the person can kind of understand the way that they're talking to themselves.
Yeah.
Because many times, especially with self-worth, like we would, hopefully never tell our child that, or a friend like, well, you shouldn't apply for the job. You're not good enough for that. I mean, that
Mm.
would be like a terrible thing to say. Like,
Mm. Absolutely.
but most of the time, nobody would put up with us if that's the way we were with our friends, and we would hopefully be more careful saying that to kids. But yet, people talk horribly to themselves.
Mm,
And so even like tapping through it, just being like, I mean, one of the funny ones that I said is, like people won't forgive themselves. You're like, nope, no mercy for me. Nope, I'm gonna carry this, I'm the martyr. And then they're just like, oh my God, this is like something that happened 20 years ago. Why am I beating myself up for this?
mm, mm,
Still. And so you can kind of reframe it, and then they're like, that's ridiculous. Like, I would hope that people get second chances of things. Why am I feeling shame for something that I did, 20, 30 years ago? And people
mm,
do hold on to things.
mm. So when you're applying the EFT tapping, can you sit, talk, like, have some statements or affirmations that will help you? And do you have those do you use those when you are doing the EFT tapping?
For me, or somebody doing it by themselves?
For both while you're working with your client, but also someone doing it by themselves.
So if somebody wants to do it by themselves, like, I can teach you like some simple ones. Like if you just happen to be in a very nervous state and you only have a couple minutes, and like you just kind of want to calm down quickly, but you only have 5 minutes. Okay. So it's not as in depth, but what you can do is you can either tap on the karate chop point just with the side of your fingers, or you can do the collarbone. Sometimes, like, I mean, if you're on a bus, you might not want to do the collarbone. So that's where, but if you breathe in through your nose for 3, hold for 3, and then out for 3. And it looks like this. And if you do that 10 times, I guarantee you will be much calmer than you were. But if you want something a little bit more complex, once you feel comfortable with the tapping spots, I mean, it's not that you have to do them in a certain order. I think a lot of times people get hung up by like, oh God, did I do it on the side of the eye when I was supposed to be doing the forehead? It's not that important as long as you're tapping on the right points. So if you want to go
Mm,
here and then go over here and then here and then here, I just find that most people get kind of confused when they don't follow the thing. So it's in the order of a question mark that goes like starting in the middle and then goes around the side, under the nose, like this, dot the bottom, and under the arm. And so if you start with a setup statement, acknowledging how you're feeling. So you're like, even though like I'm feeling really stressed out about this phone call that I have to make, like in
mm,
whatever, I deeply, completely love and accept myself. So you do the setup statement, acknowledging those things a couple times, even though I can't believe I have to make this phone call. I don't want to do it. Deeply, completely love and accept myself. Then go into the I feel statement. And we want to articulate the negative so that we can clear it. Because a lot of times we tell people we're fine and like, we try to stuff it down and we're not really solving it. We're just kind of stuffing it down and it's, will probably explode later or something.
mm,
So then you can say like, I feel really stressed. I feel angry that I have to make this phone call. Like, oh, I can't believe it. And this is really where you're able to let it all out. Be
mm,
petty, be angry, swear, do whatever you need to do, as long as you're being honest with yourself about how you're feeling, because that's the
mm,
important part of the negative round. So once you've done with that, like, okay, how do I want to feel? Okay, I want to feel calm. So you could be like, I'm open to being calm, I'm open to being grounded, I'm open to whatever. You can just kind of repeat it. There's no like real wrong way to do it if you're trying to do this very simple method. But if you wanted, like I said, have more deeper issues resolved, that's something to work with a practitioner, because there's lots of different kinds of techniques for different situations, whether it's like inner child healing or whether it's like conversations that you never got to have and you're imagining talking to somebody, for example. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different techniques, but like those are not
mm.
necessarily things that you should do by yourself if you really don't have the training or experience, because you don't want to get into those deeper issues if you're not sure how to manage the emotions that come up.
Yeah. So if you've got a lot going on in your head and your body, um, you know, is it the first thing? Is it better to stay present and be still to feel in your body where you're feeling it, or or can you do that through this process while while you're doing the EFT tapping?
You can absolutely do it like that. Like, I mean, there's different EFT techniques, but one of them is called intention tapping. And it's very focused on like, how does it feel in your body while you're saying that? So you're tapping, but but you're not really concentrating on that. You're noticing how it feels.
Mm,
Because you might say, like, I release my emotional attachment to expecting the worst. Okay. And then sometimes people are like, oh God, my shoulder hurts.
mm,
And then you kind of keep going and you just kind of keep doing it and you're kind of seeing where your intuition is guiding you and what's coming up. And somebody will be like, I know where I am, bothered about this. And so it's more focused on what's happening in the body as a result of the tapping. But yeah, there are different methods. I
good.
usually find that if you just do one spot, it's enough. Like
Mm,
if you're just starting out and just try to see how you feel. And
yeah. Is there any relevance in the, like you're going this way? Can you go on the other side as well?
sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Just depends on
Yep.
which hand you're using, I guess. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, because some people are left-handed or right-handed,
Mm,
totally fine. As long as it's like, the right points. I mean, just some people are like this, and you're like, nope, put it over to the side
yeah.
to make sure that you're tapping the right point.
All right. So how does EFT tapping help build confidence and feel more empowered in their daily life?
I think most of all, because you're able to articulate the things that you're not able to normally, and you can clear them. And it's kind of hard to explain how you clear them, but you do. Because I mean, you sit here and you're tapping and you're like, okay, I don't feel good enough. And you can kind of work yourself or starting from that negative place into a positive zone to where you're
Mm,
like, you know what? Why wouldn't I be good enough?
mm,
Like, I tell a friend that they're not good enough. Like, that
mm,
would be mean. Like,
mm.
so
Yeah.
why wouldn't I be good enough? People obviously think I'm good enough.
Yeah.
And the reframing really helps because usually by the end, even statements like, that I deeply and completely love and accept myself, some
Mm,
people at the beginning cannot say that because they've never, thought of themselves like as being lovable, or they think that it would be selfish to love themselves or something like that. And then by the end of the time, you can get them to a point where they're like, okay, I could love myself. It's fine. Like, why wouldn't I
mm,
deserve love? Everybody deserves love. Like.
mm, mm.
So it's a very powerful process. It's
Yeah. So the combination of tapping the positive self-talk and really being aware of where you're feeling it in your body, the tension is
Mhm.
can help you release those blockages and then the stress and so on, but also then help you be more confident about you and feel more empowered about yourself.
But you got to clear the negative before you go to the positive. Otherwise, it's like
Clear the negative.
polishing
Yeah.
a dirty plate.
Yeah,
You'll feel
yeah.
good for about 5 minutes, but like you're not really solving it.
Why isn't
Like
it cleaning? Yeah. Yeah. So what about some daily practices that are combined with EFT that can help strengthen self-belief and reduce stress?
so I always think it's great to add it as part of your morning routine
Hmm.
for several reasons. First of all, like before you come in contact with any people or like, the outside world job, or like, you have to go take the subway or the bus or get stuck in traffic, whatever. It's better to start with the preventative approach to your day where you're starting the day grounded and
Hmm.
centered. Because otherwise, I mean, I know that how I used to be, I would just kind of like throw myself into my day and like hope for the best and, like not center myself. I would go and of course, like, I would spill my coffee on the way out the door and then like I'd miss my train and then like, I'd step in a puddle and then like just one thing after the other. I don't know if you've ever been, the spiral that's just, and you're just like, and being able to also recalibrate throughout the day is really important because sometimes you're having a great day and then you get like I don't know, email from a boss or something that just derails you. And knowing how to recalibrate and bounce back when things happen is part of the, building up your own emotional resilience. Because
Mm,
the emotional resilience is also part of being confident, because how are you going to show up confident if like like, you just had a meltdown because of the downward spiral where you like You have to be able to compose yourself, and it's a superpower. Being able to be like, all right, I'm fine. Like I got this. Um, but for confidence, I mean, it's a day by day thing. I mean,
Mm,
also doing tapping for confidence in the morning, like the amazing day video, where it's like, I know that I can do this, and um I will be good at everything that I do, and I'll come in contact with positive people, like these kinds of messages. And then you're starting the day coming from a confident, bold spot.
mm, mm. Wow. Well, I've learned so much today, and I'm sure that I'm sure there's a lot more to learn. Before we go into the quick fire questions, five quick fire questions, if people want to, if they've got some insights out of this and they want to connect with you and get more information or work with you, how can they do so?
So they can go to my website at www.dreahunt.com. That's DREAHUNT.com. And then I'm all over social media as Andrea Hunt, Living Deliberately Today, EFT Empowerment Coaching for a Better Life on TikTok and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I am everywhere.
Nice.
And I do workshops as well. I forgot to mention that. Like, I do limiting belief empowerment workshops so that people can understand where their beliefs, come from. How can they move forward and get outside of their comfort zone feeling empowered instead of afraid or comparing themselves, or, you know, um, not feeling good enough in ways that might make them actually self-sabotage what they're
Mm,
trying to achieve.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Awesome. Might have some opportunities to collaborate with you there on some projects. Uh,
Awesome.
yeah. So there you go. If you've been watching this or listening to this and you'd like to connect with Andrea, please do so. And before I go into the questions, I'm going to be running a 5-day challenge around helping people transition through change. And
Mm,
it's from the 25th to the 29th of November at 12 p.m. New Zealand time to 1 o'clock New Zealand time, every day from the 25th to the 29th. And you'll learn about the emotional impacts of change,
mhm,
communication, resilience, confidence, and steps to move forward. So I'll be dropping the links into the podcast description along with the links for Andrea as well. So click on those, register, get in contact with Andrea, get in contact with myself, share this post on your social media, share this episode on your social media and post it and tag us in so that we can interact with you. And it'll be great to do that. So here we go. 5 quick fire questions. First question
mhm.
is, how do you define success, and has that definition changed for you over time?
Yes. I would say that success for me now is doing something with purpose that I can make a living with, where I also have my freedom. So, like, kind of for me, my idea now is as an expat nomad, so that I can, work in Albania for a month. I could go to Spain for 2 months if I want in the winter because I love Germany, but I like the sun and beaches a bit more. And I think that has changed the older that I've gotten. I think I saw success for myself anyway is kind of being more like, I don't know, corporate ladder kind of thing. Um, and I realize now that I want to do something where I can make an impact and also be able to motivate people. Like, I've always kind of been the friend that's like the motivator, like, yeah, you could totally do that. You should totally do it. Like, oh, come on. And that's kind of always been my role. So the natural choice for me was in trying in this portion of my life in my 40s was trying to go into coaching so that I could have an impact to also help people see some of the things in them that I see in them so that they
Mm,
can, yeah. Sometimes people just need a little nudge in the right direction. And
mm,
I know that times in my life where I didn't always see some potential, I really appreciated that somebody else did.
mm, mm. Who's been your greatest inspiration and why?
I would say I had a mentor when I was like in high school. My high school years were kind of turbulent. Like my parents were going through a divorce. My family kind of fell apart, and I just was not having a good teenage years. I was hanging out with the wrong people. And I think everybody gave up hope that I was going to ever do anything with myself. Except for I had one mentor named Joe Moore. And he was like a Vietnam vet, came back and was really like into helping kids in the community to like, and he was like the only person at that time that was like, Andrea, you are going to do things. This is not it for you. If you don't like it here, why don't you leave? And I was just like, what do you mean? Like I can, he's like, well, you seem totally miserable here. You hate it. You're not happy. Like, like what is it you want to do? I'm like, I don't know. I want to go to Mexico. He's like, well, then you should do that. And so he was actually one of the people that kind of like gave me that little nudge. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I could go, but I'm like, I couldn't go by myself. He's like, why not? Like, he's like, I know you could do it. I'm like, really? Could I? I'm like, and actually like that move defined everything about me in terms of believing in myself. And I have been through a lot of things in my life. And I think it's that knowing of like, okay, you know what? I can handle it. No matter what it is, I will figure it out. And having somebody believe in me during that time made all the difference. Because I don't know what I would have ended up doing, honestly.
Mm,
I
mm,
But I was not happy there. And so that was life changing.
mm. What is something that you believe that others may disagree with?
I think if you've ever heard like about the book The Body Keeps the Score, like how our emotions, negative emotions can get trapped in our body. Like I think people are very aware, like stress, negative emotion. Okay, so what happens with stress? You can get migraines, you can have, back aches, you can have stomach problems. People are very aware of that connection, but there's also like a lot of different like books and stuff like that that like certain emotions kind of go with certain parts in the body. So certain things like heart attacks can actually, it's like the body speaks in metaphors.
Mm,
A book called Louise Hay by Louise Hay called
mhm,
Heal Your Body. And it's just very interesting because whenever something goes wrong, like just look and see what it is, like what the Louise Hay book says, and you're like, oh, that is, I'm afraid to move forward. Like that's
mm,
what, and it's very weird. I always check that. And it didn't make sense to me before, but I think the older that I've gotten, I think it's especially important to understand how our emotions affect our bodies directly and why it's so important to manage our emotions so that we're not holding in anger, we're not holding in shame, we're not holding in guilt, because all of that is horribly toxic and very damaging to our bodies.
mm, mm. If you could go back and give your younger self a one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think I would have started a book sooner. Like I have like journals and stuff like that from that, but like I think I started a book like 10 years ago, which is supposed to be out next year. We'll see. Crossing fingers. It's kind of just about my journey and less about my position as a coach now, but like how I kind of came to this place, like all the things
Mm,
learning about different cultures and um learning about myself and through different situations. I think I would have started that in my 20s so that everything would be really fresh and authentic instead of my memories of how things happened.
mm,
That's really priceless,
mm,
to look at the way that your 20-year-old self thought.
mm,
Because there would be so many things that I would say to my 20-year-old self, mostly like it's not important what people think of you. Like authenticity is one of the most important things. Um, don't compare yourself. We all have different journeys. Um, the red flags that you ignore at the beginning will be the reason you break up. And one of the best one, the Maya Angelou one, that's like when people show you who they are, believe them the first time
mm. True.
and really save
Absolutely.
yourself a lot of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What is one message that you'd like to share with the world?
So my message is always, if not you, then who? And if not now, then when?
Mm,
And especially like we don't we have no idea like how long we have on this earth. And so sometimes, like I remember reading like the five regrets of the dying like a few years ago, and that really, really impacted me. It was just reading that people were like they wish they had the courage to live their dreams, and they wish they had spent less time at the office and like more time with family. And I really started thinking about like, okay, so what am I doing now so that I can look back at any age, whether it's, I don't know, the whole world ends in a year, or I have 50 more years that I can look back and be like, I know that I did the best that I could with the tools that I had to create something for myself and also have a positive impact.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Andrea, for coming and joining us on this podcast today, on the
Great.
Champion Mindset Collective podcast. Would love to have you back and maybe go a little bit deeper into other topics as well. So if you've been listening or watching this episode and you've got some insights, please, as I mentioned before, share it on your social media, tag us in so that we can interact with you as well. And make sure to share it with your friends, your family, and your workmates, and follow and subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss another episode and we can get this podcast out to the wider world. And lastly, I just want to say you are loved, you are worthy, champion your life, champion your greatness, and have an amazing day.